Edgar Berlanga versus Hamzah Sheeraz. The prediction. Knuckleheads, welcome to the Fighters Rep, where you get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God about the sport of boxing from the mind of an attorney / promoter. And this is a fight that we just had to talk about here at Knucklehead Nation, because this is a fight I'm very excited about. Why? Well, you've got two young, hungry warriors in Berlanga, who's 28 years old, and Sheeraz, who's just 26 years old. You got two guys who can knock you out in one punch and knock each other out in one punch. You got two guys from two different parts of the world, with the Londoner in Sheeraz coming over to New York to fight the brash New Yorker in Berlanga. And you got two guys that are trying to set themselves up for another big fight, potentially Canelo Alvarez. And we've seen Berlanga in there with Canelo, and he looked pretty good in his outing there. So it's a very exciting high-stakes matchup, this. And it's going to be the main event on this Saturday's fight. The Ring 3 is what this card is being billed. Something very exciting. So who is going to win this fight, right? Well, as a former fight promoter, what I look at, first and foremost, right, in a fight like this where it's very 50-50, a pick'em fight, I look at how they looked most recently and their activity, right? Both guys have been active, so that one's kind of nullified. But how did they look most recently? Well, Berlanga's coming off a first-round KO, so his confidence is going to be high, right? That's despite the fact that he lost to Canelo Alvarez in the fight before that. He seems to be justifying that performance, even though he lost, as being a decent outing. And it was a decent outing for a guy like Berlanga versus Canelo, but, he's treating it almost as if it was a win, just getting through a fight with Canelo. But he is coming off of a knockout win. Sheeraz, on the other hand, got a draw against Carlos Adames, and I think it was a bit of a gift. I don't think he deserved that draw. I thought he lost that fight watching it personally, but I guess it was close enough for some people to argue that it was a draw, especially the three people at ringside. That said, I don't think he looked good in his last fight. Not as good as Berlanga did, getting a first-round knockout. That being said, Berlanga's fighting this fight still at super middleweight, where he typically is. Sheeraz is moving up after that last performance because obviously he feels that the dehydration of getting down to middleweight affected him and his performance, and now he's moving up to super middleweight to fight Berlanga. So those are two things that kind of go against Sheeraz in me making this prediction, right? One, he didn't look as good as Berlanga did in his last performance, regardless of the opponent. And two, he's moving up in weight for the first time to super middleweight to take on a natural super middleweight in Edgar Berlanga. Now, where there is some silver lining for Sheeraz is I do think that being dehydrated messes with your nervous system to the point where you can't pull the trigger. And I do think that's probably why he didn't look his usual self against Adames in his last fight. I also think that he's a big man, 6'3". He's got a 2-inch height advantage and reach advantage over Berlanga. So it may suit him very well on fight night, this super middleweight division, but it's left to be seen. So that's why I like Berlanga ever so slightly, right? Another thing I like about this fight for Berlanga is the fact that he's 28 years old versus the 26-year-old. He's a bit closer to his prime because of that. They're also fighting in New York, which is going to be an advantage, I believe, for Berlanga. And Berlanga's had, better experience, really. I mean, he's been in there with Canelo, right? So that experience versus Canelo, I think, will serve him well if he figures out what he did right and wrong in the ring against a guy who's greener than him and a guy like Hamzah Sheeraz, right? And listen, the records are very similar. 23-1 for Berlanga, 21-0-1 for Sheeraz, right? So there isn't a huge discrepancy or disparity, rather, in their record, but Berlanga does have the more quality resume at this point, right? I also think Berlanga has a very solid, kind of amateur upbringing here in the United States. Might be a bit better than Sheeraz's. That remains to be seen. But I do lean towards the United States a bit more when it comes to, just the quality of boxing. So for me, I think this is a very close fight. I read somewhere online they were saying like 52% chance Berlanga wins versus 48 Sheeraz wins. I do believe that's very reasonable considering Sheeraz's knockout power, height, reach, if he uses it properly. But I just think it's going to be too much pressure coming over to New York off a poor performance, in my opinion, right? Where he was probably gifted a draw and taking on a guy in Berlanga who's brash, who's very, very confident right now. I just think it's going to be a touch too much for Sheeraz, but I think it's a fight that's great. I'm glad it's being made, and I think it'll only make the loser and the winner better, and these are the kind of fights I want to see. So I'm going to go ahead and say Berlanga's going to win this fight by unanimous decision, maybe even a split decision. But I'm going to ask that you tell me what you think is going to happen in this fight in the comment section below. After you do that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join the channel to help me continue to build our boxing fraternity right here at FightersRep Knucklehead Nation. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this fight. I think it's a very exciting fight, and we will go live immediately after the fight and talk about the other fights on the card as the week progresses.
Subscribe and join the FightersRep. It'll be the best thing you ever did, Knucklehead.